I started noticing something strange about old photographs of vehicles a few years ago. Not modern cars, but carriages and streetcars from the 1800s. Elegant vehicles moving through city streets, carrying passengers, rolling along tracks and cobblestones. But when I looked closer, something was missing. No horses, no engine compartments, no visible power source of any kind. I brushed it off at first. Maybe the horses were just out of frame. Maybe these were display models parked for the photograph. But then I started comparing hundreds of images, and what I found changed everything I thought I understood about technology. The official story is simple enough. We are told that vehicles in the 1800s were pulled by horses. Before the internal combustion engine, before electric motors became practical, der animals provided the motive power for human transportation. Stone by stone, the history books construct a clear narrative of technological progress. Horses gave way to steam, steam gave way to electricity and gasoline, and the modern automobile emerged in the early 20th century. It sounds reasonable. It sounds logical. But when you actually look at the photographic evidence, when you examine the images with your own eyes, that story starts to fall apart. Take San Francisco in the 1870s and 1880s. Hundreds of photographs survive from this period, documenting the city's rapid growth. You can see streetcars rolling down Market Street, elegant passenger vehicles moving through crowded intersections. The official explanation is that these were cable cars, pulled by underground cables, or horse-drawn omnibuses. But look at the photographs closely. Look at where the horses should be. In image after image, there are no horses, no cables visible, no connection to any external power source, just vehicles, carrying passengers, somehow moving through the streets. I spent weeks examining these images, convinced I was missing something obvious. Maybe the horses were just ahead, cropped out of the frame. Maybe the cable mechanisms were simply not visible at street level. But the more I looked, the more the official explanation failed. The vehicles in these photographs have no shafts for horse harnesses, no attachment points for cables. They are self-contained units, complete in themselves, moving without any visible means of propulsion. The proportions are wrong for horse-drawn vehicles. When you measure the chassis length, when you examine the wheel placement and passenger compartment design, these vehicles were not built to be pulled. They were built to move on their own. Low centers of gravity, balanced weight distribution, engineering that makes no sense if an external force was meant to provide locomotion. The design language speaks of independence, of mechanical self-sufficiency. And it was not just San Francisco. I started finding the same anomaly in photographs from London. The 1860s and 1870s show omnibuses and carriages moving through streets like Oxford and Regent. Elegant vehicles, some carrying dozens of passengers, rolling past shops and pedestrians. We are told these were horse-drawn. But where are the horses? In photograph after photograph, I found vehicles without any visible animals attached. No harnesses, no reins, no drivers holding leads. Just passengers sitting calmly in vehicles that appeared to be moving under their own power. The same pattern appeared in photographs from Moscow, from St. Petersburg, from Boston and Philadelphia and Chicago. Cities across multiple continents, separated by thousands of miles and supposedly isolated by the transportation limitations of the era. Yet they all show the same thing. Vehicles without engines. Vehicles without horses. Vehicles that should not have been able to move, yet clearly did. The similarity was striking, almost impossible to explain away. Historians will tell you this is simply a photographic artifact. Long exposure times meant horses sometimes blurred out of images, they say. The animals were removed for aesthetic reasons in staged photographs. These were display vehicles, parked for promotional purposes. The explanations sound plausible until you examine the evidence systematically. Because these are not occasional anomalies. These are the majority of vehicle photographs from this period. And the vehicles are clearly in motion, wheels turned at angles, passengers braced against movement, street scenes showing active traffic flowing around them. Think about it. How do you move a 2-ton streetcar without horses or an engine? How do you transport 40 passengers across a city using technology that supposedly did not exist? The official timeline tells us that practical electric motors were not developed until the 1880s and 1890s, that internal combustion engines did not become viable until even later. But the photographs show these vehicles operating decades earlier in cities around the world, as if this technology was completely ordinary. The infrastructure tells its own story. Look at the streets in these photographs, not just the vehicles, but what surrounds them. Elaborate rail networks embedded in cobblestones, switches and junctions allowing vehicles to change tracks, dedicated lanes and stopping points positioned throughout the city, stations with covered platforms, signage directing passengers to different routes. This is not primitive infrastructure thrown together for horse-drawn carts. This is a sophisticated transportation system designed and built for vehicles that could navigate complex urban environments under their own power. I found photographs of maintenance facilities in several cities. Large buildings with multiple vehicle bays, specialized equipment, what appear to be power distribution systems of some kind. The scale of these facilities suggests a mature industry, not experimental technology. Hundreds of vehicles being serviced simultaneously. Supply chains and logistics networks supporting citywide transportation systems. The kind of infrastructure that takes decades to develop and requires enormous capital investment. The pattern was unmistakable. This was not happening in one city or one country. It was global. Something had powered these vehicles, something that worked reliably across thousands of miles and multiple climates, something that left no visible trace in the photographs and no explanation in the official historical record. The evidence was hiding in plain sight. I kept digging through archives and digital collections. London, Paris, Berlin, Vienna, New York, Boston, Philadelphia, New Orleans, Melbourne, Sydney, Cape Town. Everywhere I looked, I found the same impossible evidence. Vehicles moving without visible power sources, infrastructure built for technology that supposedly did not exist, photographs that contradict everything we have been taught about the history of transportation. The questions multiplied with every archive I opened, and nobody seemed to want to explain why. Here is where it gets interesting. When I started examining the construction details of these vehicles, I found something that should not be possible according to the official timeline. The metalwork is too precise. The components are too standardized. We are talking about vehicles built in the 1850s and 1860s displaying manufacturing tolerances that suggest machine tooling far beyond what 19th century factories supposedly possessed. Identical wheel assemblies appearing in photographs from San Francisco and St. Petersburg. The same chassis designs in London and Melbourne. Decorative elements that match across continents down to the millimeter. The standardization alone is staggering. Think about what it takes to manufacture identical complex machines in multiple locations around the world. You need precision measurement systems. You need standardized parts that can be produced in one factory and assembled in another. You need engineering drawings that translate perfectly across languages and cultures. You need supply chains capable of moving raw materials and finished components across oceans. The official history tells us this kind of global manufacturing infrastructure did not exist until the 20th century. But the vehicles in these photographs tell a different story. I found records of vehicle maintenance from Boston in the 1870s. Workers servicing these streetcars noted that replacement parts arrived from distant suppliers, pre-fitted and ready for installation. The accounts described this as completely routine, unremarkable, the way things had always been done. But how? How do you ship precision-manufactured parts across thousands of miles before standardized measurement systems supposedly existed? How do you maintain identical vehicles in cities that had no direct communication with each other? The logistics make no sense unless there was a global infrastructure network we have not been told about. And then I found something in an archive in Vienna that made my blood run cold. A technical report from 1863 describing the inspection of a streetcar that had been involved in an accident. The inspector documented the vehicle's interior mechanisms in detail. He described sealed compartments containing components he could not identify, materials that did not match any known manufacturing process, power systems that appeared to operate without fuel, without steam, without any input the inspector could understand. He noted that the vehicle had been in continuous service for at least 40 years before the accident, possibly longer. Nobody knew who had built it or how it worked. They only knew that it worked reliably, year after year, requiring minimal maintenance. The report was filed and forgotten. I found it buried in a collection of municipal records that had not been catalogued properly. Interestingly, several pages appeared to be missing. The sections describing the unknown components in detail had been removed at some point, leaving only the inspector's general observations. Someone had decided that specific information should not be preserved. What if these vehicles were not early experiments in transportation technology? What if they were something else entirely? What if they were remnants of a civilization that came before, artifacts of a world that existed prior to whatever catastrophe reset human history? The more I examined the evidence, the more this explanation fit the facts. Consider the timeline contradictions. We are told that practical electric motors were invented in the 1830s, but did not become useful for transportation until decades later. We are told that the first electric streetcars appeared in the 1880s, primitive experiments that gradually improved over time. But the photographs show sophisticated electric-style vehicles operating in the 1850s and 1860s, part of mature urban systems that had clearly been functioning for years. The official invention dates do not match the photographic evidence. We are told that internal combustion engines were developed in the 1870s and 1880s, revolutionary technology that transformed transportation over subsequent decades. But some of the vehicles in these photographs show design features consistent with internal propulsion systems decades before such technology supposedly existed. Exhaust vents positioned for heat dissipation, fuel access points, engine compartment layouts that make no sense for horse-drawn or cable-pulled vehicles. The engineering speaks of internal power generation, not external force. Or consider another possibility. What if these vehicles ran on technology we have completely forgotten? What if there were power sources available to the previous civilization that we no longer understand or even recognize? I found references in obscure technical journals to something called atmospheric electricity. The idea that the Earth's atmosphere contains harvestable electrical energy that can be captured and used. The concept was discussed seriously in the 1800s before being dismissed and forgotten. What if it was not theoretical? What if it was a memory of something that had actually worked? Think about it. How do you power a vehicle without fuel, without batteries, without any visible connection to an external source? you would need to harvest energy from the environment itself, the atmosphere, the Earth's magnetic field, some source that is omnipresent and invisible. The vehicles in these photographs show no fuel tanks, no battery compartments, no charging connections. They appear to simply work, drawing power from somewhere we cannot see. The Tartarian theory suggests that a global civilization existed before the mud flood catastrophe. A civilization with technology we have been taught to believe is impossible. A civilization that built infrastructure spanning continents, unified in design and engineering. A civilization that was destroyed so thoroughly that we have forgotten it ever existed. Its achievements attributed to later inventors or dismissed as impossible. The vehicles are evidence, not just of forgotten technology, but of systematic erasure. What kind of power source could operate reliably across every climate zone on Earth? What kind of engineering knowledge could produce identical vehicles in factories separated by oceans? What kind of civilization builds global transportation networks and then vanishes completely from historical memory? The official story has no answers. But the photographs keep asking the questions. And the more I looked, the more I realized that someone had worked very hard to make sure we never found them. The implications kept me awake at night. If there was an advanced global civilization that built these vehicles, a civilization with technology sophisticated enough to create self-powered transportation systems spanning continents, what happened to it? The mud flood theory suggests a catastrophic event, something that buried entire cities under meters of sediment and forced humanity to start over. The photographs of buried bridges and submerged first floors across Europe and America support this timeline. An event massive enough to bury buildings would certainly have disrupted the infrastructure that powered these mysterious vehicles. The technology stopped working, or the knowledge of how to maintain it was lost. Or both. The survivors would have inherited vehicles they could no longer operate. Imagine finding a fleet of perfectly functional machines with no understanding of what made them run. You might hitch horses to them, converting sophisticated technology into primitive transportation. You might strip them for parts, melting down components whose purpose you did not understand. You might simply abandon them, leaving them to rust and decay, while you focused on more immediate concerns, like food and shelter. Within a generation or two, the memory of how they actually worked would fade. Within a century, it would be forgotten entirely. This would explain the strange transitional period visible in photographs from the mid-1800s. You see both types of vehicles in the same images. Sophisticated self-powered machines operating alongside crude horse-drawn carts. The old technology slowly failing, being replaced by primitive alternatives as the knowledge to maintain it disappeared. The photographs capture a civilization in decline, not one advancing toward new innovations. And here is what keeps me searching through archives at 3 in the morning. If they lied about the vehicles, what else are they lying about? What other evidence of the previous civilization has been buried, physically and historically? How much of what we think we know about human progress is actually true? The vehicles are just one piece of a much larger puzzle. They are the thread that, when you pull it, starts to unravel everything. Consider the official narrative of technological progress. We are taught that humanity advanced slowly over millennia, building knowledge incrementally, each generation adding slightly to what came before. The internal combustion engine was invented because scientists finally understood the principles of thermodynamics. Electric motors emerged because researchers discovered electromagnetism. Everything follows a logical sequence of discovery and application, each innovation building on previous knowledge. It is a comforting story. It suggests that progress is inevitable, that we are always moving forward, that the future will be better than the past. But what if that story is backwards? What if we are not advancing toward new heights, but recovering from a catastrophic fall? What if the great inventors of the 19th and 20th centuries were not discovering new principles, but rediscovering old ones? What if the technology we celebrate as modern innovation is actually a pale shadow of what existed before the reset? The suppression makes sense when you consider the implications. If people knew that advanced civilizations could be destroyed and forgotten, they might ask uncomfortable questions about our own society. They might wonder what could happen again. They might demand to know what really happened and who is hiding the truth. The stability of modern institutions depends on the narrative of progress, on the belief that we are more advanced than any civilization that came before. Admitting that we might be rebuilding rather than building would undermine that foundation. So the evidence is buried. The photographs are dismissed as anomalies. The vehicles are explained away as experimental prototypes or photographic artifacts. Anyone who questions the official timeline is marginalized, labeled a conspiracy theorist, excluded from serious discussion. The pattern of suppression is as clear as the pattern in the photographs themselves. I look at modern electric vehicles differently now. The sleek designs, the silent motors, the promise of clean transportation. We are told this is cutting-edge technology, the future of human mobility. But maybe it is something older. Maybe we are finally rediscovering what was lost, reinventing what the previous civilization already perfected. The shapes are similar. The principles are the same. Silent propulsion, environmental power, freedom from fossil fuels. Are we innovating or remembering? The photographs are still there, waiting in archives and digital collections. Thousands of images showing vehicles that should not exist. Technology that contradicts the official timeline, evidence of a world we have been taught to forget. You can find them if you look. You can see what I saw, the impossible truth hiding in plain sight. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The vehicles tell a story that challenges everything we think we know about our past. And maybe that is exactly why nobody wants us to find them. Maybe the truth about our technological history is too dangerous to acknowledge. Maybe the people who control the narrative understand that some secrets must stay buried. But the vehicles remain. Silent witnesses to a catastrophe we are not supposed to remember. They carried passengers through streets that no longer exist, powered by technology we have forgotten, built by a civilization that was erased from history. The horses were added later, a desperate attempt to keep them moving after the power failed. But the photographs remember. And now, so do I.